This video is brought to you by Sailrite. This video will show you how to sew your very own panel drapes using Sunbrella furniture fabric from Sailrite. You may have already seen the previous video on installing the hardware and the drapes, but this video will actually show you how to construct them. Be sure to watch that video prior to watching this video. It will help you to determine the appropriate size to make your panel drapes. For our panel drapes, we determined that we want it to be approximately 40 inches wide by approximately 85.5 inches long. Let's get started and show you how to build them. Cheryl Lynn is striking a line on the Sunbrella furniture fabric from selvage edge to selvage edge to make sure that this end is perfectly straight. Because the Sunbrella furniture fabric has a tendency to unravel, she's going to use the professional Ingle hot knife to cut this edge of the fabric off. You'll notice she's also cutting on top of a piece of glass. That helps to prevent damage to the tabletop. You could use scissors or pinking shears if you like, but then you have to contend with the unraveling. Now that that edge has been cut off, she's also going to cut off this selvage edge all the way along its length. The Ingle Professional Hot Knife heats up in approximately 4 seconds, ready to cut synthetic fabrics. It's perfect for Sunbrella furniture fabric like this. Since all of the edges of the fabric will have double hems installed, it's really not necessary to use a hot knife to seal the edge, but it definitely makes the job a lot neater. We'll be constructing 2 exact panel drapes, and each one of those needs to be approximately 40 inches in width. We're marking the fabric to 45 inches. That will allow for a 2.5-inch hem on both sides of the panel drape. Cheryl Lynn's moving the measuring stick all the way down the height of the panel drape to measure it so that she can accurately strike a line. Once she's done with that, she'll strike a line matching up all those marks so that she gets a perfectly straight edge. The Sunbrella furniture fabric marks fairly well with a number 2 pencil. There are some colors you may not be able to see the pencil with, and in those situations we recommend using a soapstone pencil that you can also purchase from Sailrite. Now we have a line that's marked on the fabric that we can use to guide our cutting. We'll use the professional hot knife again to cut the fabric, and this fabric is cut to the width of 45 inches. When we're done, it'll be approximately 40 inches in width after the double hem on both sides. Most of the Sunbrella furniture fabric, if it is a solid color, does not have a right side or a wrong side. However, some of the patterns like this do. So the fabric has now been flipped so the right side is on top of the table, the wrong side is up. We're going to use double-sided tape here to create our first hem. And this hem will be very small, approximately a 1/2 inch. And we put that double-sided tape on top of the fabric, and now we peel off the transfer paper, revealing the glue. And now you can just baste this hem in place. This helps to hold the fabric together prior to sewing. It is not permanent, and it stays in the hem. So she now creases the fabric to create a 1/2 inch hem there, and that double-sided tape helps to hold everything in place. A little bit later on in this video, we're going to show you using straight pins, which are a little bit more cumbersome to use, but we wanted to give you 2 approaches to creating a hem. Now we're going to measure the width of the hem here, which is 1.5 inches, and now Cheryl Lynn's going to use straight pins to basically hold this hem in place prior to sewing. If you have not purchased the double-sided tape for acrylic, part number 129, as you can see here in the video, you can use straight pins to accomplish the same task. For speed and accuracy, I would much rather use the double-sided tape, part number 129. It definitely makes this job a little bit faster, and it's also nice because if you get the hem down incorrectly, you can peel it back up again and reapply it. However, we wanted to give you 2 approaches. Now that the double hem is held in place, we'll take it over to the Ultrafeed LS1. We're going to sew a straight stitch along the inner edge of that hem, and we're using V46 thread and a number 14 needle. The Ultrafeed LS1 is a walking foot sewing machine. Sunbrella furniture fabric has a nice soft hand and is lighter than a canvas. It's very much like an upholstery fabric, so most home sewing machines can sew it very easily. As you can see, when Sherilyn approaches a pin, she'll have to pull the straight pin out of the fabric to avoid from running over it. If you use double-sided tape, you would not have to do that, so even sewing is a little bit faster if you use the double-sided tape, part number 129. Sailrite recommends that you use either a V69 or a V46 thread when sewing Sunbrella furniture fabric. Any heavier thread will usually cause excessive puckering. Our stitch length is set to approximately 5 to 6 millimeters in length. Usually when you begin your stitch you want to reverse, and also when you end your stitch you want to reverse to lock the stitch in place. Here you'll see Sherilyn reversing at the end of the stitch to keep the stitches from coming undone. We'll not show this entire process again, but we're going to repeat that exact same procedure on the opposite side of this panel. However, this time we're going to use double-sided tape for the entire process. At the top of the panel drape, we're going to have a sleeve that will be used to insert the rod, and we'll also have a flap of fabric at the top that will hang proud of the rod. We're going to measure down 13 3/4 inches and strike a line all the way across the width of the fabric. This 13 3/4 inches will accommodate for a double hem and also the sleeve and also the flap at the top. Now we're going to strike a line across matching up those marks. We'll again use the basting tape, part number 129, to create a 1/2 inch hem along this edge. Peel off the transfer tape, revealing the glue, and then we'll create that 1/2 inch hem. Sunbrella furniture fabric is rather soft, so you want to be careful not to stretch or pull on the fabric as you create these hems. It's always a good idea just to apply gentle pressure to the fabric without pulling or shrinking the fabric, because if you pull or shrink the fabric you won't get it to the right size and it'll look like it's not perfectly straight. So you'll notice how careful Sherilyn is when she's basting or creating these hems.
Okay, now I'm going to bring this down to the line.
Now she's obviously going to create a very large hem here all the way down to the line. And again, she's not going to use double-sided tape here. Here she's going to use the straight pins. Again, I would recommend using the double-sided tape. You'll notice how careful she's being to be sure that the fabric does not stretch and that there are no wrinkles in the fabric when she's applying the straight pins. It's the same procedure for the double-sided tape. You just don't want to stretch Sunbrella furniture fabric because you'll get a little bit of an odd-shaped panel when you're done if you do that. Once everything's held in place, we'll take it over to the Sailrite Ultrafeed LS1 sewing machine and we'll sew a straight stitch along the inner edge of that hem. While we're sewing this, we should discuss the advantages of using a Sunbrella furniture fabric. First off, it's 100% solution dyed acrylic. It holds up to the sun better than any other fabric out there, and it's very stain resistant and even water resistant. In our opinion, there's no better fabric for panel drapes than Sunbrella furniture fabric from Sailrite. Since straight pins were used, every time we come to a straight bend, if the sewing machine has to sew through it, we'll pull the pin out before we sew through it. In some situations, many people will actually sew right over the pin, and usually it doesn't cause any problems at all, especially with an Ultrafeed sewing machine, but the normal practice is to pull the pins. Now if you can get by a pin when you're sewing, in other words if you move the pins into the inner portion of the material as you see here, you can obviously just leave the pin in place. We're now going to mark a line as a reference point for sewing our inner sleeve. This is the sleeve that will accommodate the rod, and we're going to mark it 3 1/4 inches up from that stitch line we just created. So again, this is 3¼ inches up, and then we'll strike a line. The measurements in this video are for our panel drape. Yours may be different, or you may desire a different look altogether. Obviously, the size of your panel drape, even the hems, and even the sleeves can be altered to fit your requirements. We'll now take it over to the sewing machine, and we'll use that line as our guide and sew directly on top of that line, being sure to reverse at the beginning and the end of our stitch. And we're going to again sew a straight stitch. You'll notice that the Saorite Ultrafeed sewing machines walk right over bumps easily. It's a great sewing machine for applications where you have to sew through thick assemblies. Most home sewing machines can do this as well, however you may have to lift the foot to get over the bump. And now here you can see where that opening is for the rod and also the flap at the top. To ensure that the fabric stays in place and we can smooth it out nice and flat, we're going to put weights on the two corners of the panel drape, and then we're going to measure down its entire length of the fabric to determine the height of the actual drape. Now that the fabric is held down on this one side, we'll smooth the fabric out. We do not want to stretch the fabric, we just want it laying nice and flat. We'll now measure down the entire length of the fabric, and we're working with an overall length of 85½ inches. So from the top edge here all the way down its side, we'll measure down to 85½ inches and place a mark with a pencil. We'll do the same thing to the other side, and we'll also do the same thing to the middle of the fabric so that we can strike a straight line. Now underneath this line we'll mark the fabric at 3 inches from the line, down 3 inches, and again we're going to strike another line directly underneath the first line that we marked on the fabric. This will be our cut line. So we're going to take the fabric over to the piece of glass, and we're going to use that Engel Professional Hot Knife again to cut the fabric along that outer line. There are 2 lines on the fabric. This is that line that we marked 3 inches away from the 85½ inch line. And then we're going to create a double hem here. We're going to use the basting tape again to create a 1/2 inch hem along this edge. Now, prior to creating the last and final hem, we're going to use drapery weights to weight down the bottom edge of the fabric.
Because I don't want these showing when you fold it over, I'm going to put them in farther.
These drapery weights will be sewn in place just with the pre-waxed twine and a hand needle. You can use other thread as well. Since we'll be sewing along that line or very close to that line, we want to make sure that they're not directly on top of that line, so they need to be about a 1/2 inch away from that line that we're going to fold the fabric to. And here you can see we're just using the pre-waxed twine and a hand needle and sewing them in place. We're going to put 4 drapery weights. We recommend that you put a drapery weight approximately every 10 to 18 inches along the length of your panel drapes, at the bottom only. We'll not be showing this entire procedure here, but we'll do that to all of the 4 drapery weights that we have at the bottom of our panel drape. Now that the drapery weights are sewn in place, we're going to use the double-sided tape and place it directly on top of that 1/2 inch hem that we created. And then we're going to fold this over to finish the double hem here, with the drapery weights sewn into the sleeve. And here again you'll see how carefully she folds the fabric over so that she prevents any stretching of the fabric or pulling of the fabric. Just puts it on nice and evenly and smoothly. Now all that's left is to take it over the sewing machine one more time and create a stitch along the inner edge of that hem. Because the drapery weights are far enough away from that edge, we're not having to worry about sewing through them. And here we come to the other end. And you can see the ultra feed walk right over that bump there. That's a pretty big, substantial bump because of all the doubled over fabric. And we do some reversing at the end. And now our panel is complete, ready for installation. With that said, this is only one panel. You need to make one more of these. Just do it exactly the same way. If you've not yet watched the installing panel drapes with tiebacks video, you should watch that next. It'll show you how to install the hardware and also give you some tips on measuring for your panel drapes. I'm Eric Grant with Sailrite. Thanks for watching this video. It's your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. Thanks for your support.